Welcome to the Privacy Mentor Podcast, your partner in the fight against identity theft, fraud, and cyber threats. I'm your host, Carrie Kursky. Welcome to episode 72 of Privacy Mentor Podcast. So if you are a regular listener or subscriber to the show, thank you, appreciate it. If not, go ahead and take a moment to subscribe. But if you've listened to previous episodes, you've heard me say multiple times how Experian is one of the bureaus that doesn't have an online account for managing a credit freeze. And if you had the online account, that meant you had a credit lock, which is similar to a freeze, but you could be giving up some of the rights afforded to you by federal law. Well, last week, the second to last week of May of 2022, Experian changed the game. They now offer an online account to manage a credit freeze. Not only that, the website you used to be able to use to manage a credit freeze, that's no longer there. You have to set up the online account. So that was a big shock for all of us, especially those of us in the business who help people with this all the time. So if you already have a freeze in place, but you don't have a username and password or an online account for Experian, go ahead and set up the online account. Because if not, when you try to lift your freeze online, you're going to have to do it at that point anyways. Now, you still can use their 800 number, their phone number, to use their automated phone service to lift the freeze. But again, managing online is much, much easier. So to go ahead and set up the Experian online account for managing your credit freeze, you're going to go to experian.com/freeze/center.html. We'll put the link in the show notes. That way you'll have it there as well. When you get on the page, and that was the same page you used to use to be able to lift the freeze under the old way, where you just would enter a bunch of information, enter your PIN, and enter the date. Now the screen has changed. So you're going to see it's going to say security freeze, and it's going to say manage your freeze for free. New to Experian, sign up, create a free account. So that's what the page looks like. So what you would do is you would click on create a free account. Now, I do want to point out that if you had already used the online account or online process to set up a credit lock, and then you realize that the lock really wasn't the best way to go, you might be able to use those credentials in this too. But if you're not quite sure, what I would recommend is go ahead and go through create a free account. Because if you have an account, it's going to tell you already have an account. And if that's the case, then enter the username and password that you have. So some of this is kind of trial and error right now because it's relatively new. But if you don't have the online account with Experian, you're going to click on create the free account. Then from there, it's going to ask you to enter your information. So you're going to put your name, your last name, your address, your social. Yes, you're going to have to put your social. That's how they know that it's you. And your phone numbers, email addresses. Now, before you click on submit and continue on this first page, down at the very bottom, you need to uncheck where it says, yes, send me helpful tips about managing my credit, protecting my identity, and offers from Experian. If you do not uncheck that, you will be inundated with emails. I know this because when I set up mine, I forgot to uncheck it and I was bombarded. So later I had to go back into my preferences and opt out. So start right off the gate by unchecking that, saying, nope, don't send me that stuff. Then you go to the next page. It's going to ask you to create a username and password and ask you, a couple of security question answers. It's going to ask you to create a PIN. Now, as far as I can tell, this is not the same PIN that you had in the past for managing the credit freeze. This is a PIN used for managing the online account. So make sure you make a notation in your notes where you're recording the username and password that this is the account PIN and not the freeze PIN. Because Experian's trying to do like the other two bureaus and move away from using PINs. They just want you to have an online account. Then after you've entered your information, a couple different things can happen. Either they're going to text you a code to confirm your identity, or they're going to ask you ID verifying questions based on information on your credit report, or they might do both. Now, some of the questions they're going to ask you are like the ones you've had in the past, where it might say, in 2019, you had an auto loan or lease with which of the following creditors, and it's multiple choice, and one of the answers available is always none of the above in case it doesn't apply. Be very careful when you're answering these security or ID verifying questions, because if you answer with the wrong answer, you will be locked out. Now, they do let you try it again. I don't know if this is good or bad, but we had a client that we were helping them set this up, and they answered the questions wrong, and it said, oh, can't verify your identity. Try again. So we just went back to the beginning, did it all again, and they were able to set up the online account. Now, I know for convenience factor, that's great, because if you screw up, you get a mulligan, you get to do it again. But what I don't like about it is how many times can you do that? Meaning if it's a bad guy trying to do it, how many times do they get to be able to do it before it locks out the account? That I don't have an answer for, because again, this just came out last week. So try to answer those questions best you can. If you already have access to a credit report, which if you have the online account for Equifax or TransUnion, you can log into those and look at your most recent report. Now, it might vary slightly from what information Experian has on file, but you can use it as a guide or a template to help you answer some of those questions. And if you're successful, now you're going to have the online account. It's going to open to a screen, and it's going to say that your account is probably frozen, because again, if you followed the steps we recommend in the past, you've already frozen it using the old method. So you're just confirming that the account is frozen. You don't really have to do anything else. If it says unfrozen, and this is the first time you're doing this, go ahead and push the button and toggle it to make it say frozen. And that way your account's frozen. It'll also say, oh, upgrade to a lock. A lock is not an upgrade. It is a downgrade. As you've heard me say before, a credit freeze is mandated by federal law. It says what the bureaus are required to do, and it says what your rights are. But if you use a credit lock, it's a different word. It's a lock, not a freeze. So do the bureaus have to abide by the same laws? Do you still have your own rights afforded to you by this federal law? Maybe, maybe not. I've noticed personally that people who have a credit lock with Experian on their credit reports, when they reviewed their own reports, it does not say on the report that the person has a freeze. If you have a freeze, it will say so on the credit report. So just keep that in mind. Now, here's another interesting thing. When you log out of this, because you're just setting up the account, and the reason you're doing it now is because when you do need to lift your freeze, you don't want to have to take this extra time to do it at a later time. You just want a username, password, log in, manage it. When you log back in, at least for right now, they may change this at a later time, but right now, when you log back in, it doesn't show the free stuff right up at the top. What you have to do is scroll down and look on the right side. And first it'll say the status of the lock, and it's going to say that it's unlocked, which that's what you want. Underneath that, it's going to show the status of the credit freeze. So don't be tricked. Don't forget the terminology. Don't log in and be like, oh, wait, I want the lock and the freeze. No. You only want the credit freeze. So when you log into the account, if you need to temporarily lift it, scroll down on the homepage. They call it the dashboard. Scroll down, and on the bottom, towards the bottom on the right-hand side, you're going to show the status of the credit freeze. It's going to show that it is frozen, and then you can turn that off or you toggle it. And then it'll ask you if you want to remove it, which is permanent remove, or if you want to lift it, which is temporary. I recommend doing the temporary. If you're applying for a new credit card, lift it for a week. And then after the week's done, it goes right back on. If you're doing anything regarding a mortgage or a mortgage refinance, I suggest lifting it for about 30 days because the mortgage company is going to pull the credit report the first time you applied, then they're also going to pull it again right before the mortgage closing. If you are going to your car dealership because you're going to buy a car or you're going to get a new lease, usually that's done all in the same day. So you can just lift it for 24 or 48 hours. But always lift, don't remove. Because if you remove, then you have to remember to log back in and put it back on. Or if you do the lift, it does it for you. So once again, credit bureaus changing the games and not really telling many people about it until you try to do it. So as of the second week of May of 2022, you can now set up an online account to manage your credit freeze with Experian. Equifax and TransUnion already have this option. They've had it for a few years. Experian was the only one who didn't. When they first came out with the online account, it was only to manage the credit lock, which really is not the same thing as a credit freeze. So you had to use the old method of putting the credit freeze on. But now, again, second week of May 2022, the old method of managing a credit freeze online has changed. You can no longer use the old method, the old website screen. Now that has been replaced with creating an online account. I recommend taking the time to do it now as opposed to waiting until you need to lift your credit freeze, because that's going to take you extra time and it's going to slow you down. Now, you can always use their automated phone service, and we'll put the phone number in the show notes. You can always call that and enter your PIN and everything else to be able to lift the freeze. But, sometimes the automated phone service works and sometimes it doesn't. So if you want to expedite the process of managing your credit freeze with all three credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, set up the online account with each credit bureau. We're going to put the link exactly to where to do this on Experian's website. It's normally experian.com/freeze/center, but that could change. So again, we'll put the link into the show notes. Now, don't forget, there are two other credit bureaus that we recommend that you freeze as well. One is Innovis. They allow you to set up an online account to manage the freeze. And the other one is NCTUE, National Consumer Telecom Utilities Exchange. That's primarily for utility accounts like mobile phones. That one does not have an online service to be able to, or an online account to manage your freeze. You do it like how Experian used to do the old method. You go to the website, enter the information, and it'll give you a confirmation that it's either been frozen or if it's been lifted. So right now, no username and password. Out of all the 5 bureaus we recommend freezing, NCTUE right now is the only one that does not allow the online account or username and password access. If you'd like to learn more about protecting yourself from identity theft, you can always check out our book called Protect Your Identity, or we do have an online program where you can protect your identity in 14 days. Doesn't have to take 14 days to do it. You can do it you get access to everything right at the first day when you first sign up. But the reason we did 14 days is because people say, well, I think it's going to take me too much time. So we've broken it down into 14 steps that take 10 minutes a day or less. At the end of the 14 days, you have your identity prevention process put in place, making your identity difficult for bad guys to use, which means they move on to an easier target. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us here. And if you'd like to learn more, check out our website that's going to be launching June 1st, which is the date of this podcast. It's privacy-mentor.com. It's going to be an extension of this podcast where you can get more information about how to protect yourself from identity theft, fraud, and cyber threats, and how to reclaim your privacy in the digital age. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Privacy Mentor. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcast shows. If you love the show, please share with your friends, and don't forget, give us a 5-star review.